Our movie begins after the death of her husband Jerry. Elaine moves to Arcata, California, where she plans on starting a new life in a place that tolerates witchcraft. She might have killed her husband, but she seems to be in denial, saying he left her. After her long drive, Elaine finally gets to her destination, a Victorian-themed apartment owned by her mentor Barbara. As she attempts to bring her luggage out of the car, Trish Manning arrives, claiming to be the interior designer assigned by Barbara to spice up the apartment. Since she is new to town, Trish volunteers to accompany Elaine to a Victorian tea room downtown, where they soon talk about the intricacies of men. Elaine claims that she used to be clueless about what men wanted, but ever since she studied parapsychology, she understands them so much better. She also talks about how she died when Jerry left, but she is reborn as a witch. Not long after, Trish's husband, Richard, arrives in the tea room and asks his wife to go out for lunch, but as he meets Elaine's gaze, he instantly gets starstruck. Later that night, Elaine performs a ritual where she asks her goddess to send her a man that will love her. She lies on a carpet with star symbols and repeatedly says, "Love me," to manifest her spell. The next day, Elaine heads to the local witch store, where she sells her soaps, candles, voodoo dolls, and a few other items that she made. After the store owner reassures her that the items will probably do well, Elaine heads to the park, where she meets Wayne, a literature professor in their local college. The two quickly get acquainted with one another, and later that evening, they drive to Wayne's cabin in the woods, where one thing leads to another. Before Elaine goes with Wayne's advances, she drugs him, resulting in a mind-blowing lovemaking. However, after they've done the act, Wayne becomes clingy and whiny, much to Elaine's disappointment. She doesn't sleep beside him that night, but she does prepare breakfast for him the next day, and Wayne is still as whiny as he was the night before. However, later that day, Wayne dies, probably from the excessive amounts of hallucinogens that Elaine gave him. Consequently, she buries him in a jar of her own urine with some herbs and a used tampon. The next day, Elaine returns to her apartment, and Trish visits her to check how she's doing. Trish later shares that she's going to Dallas for a furniture convention, meaning that Richard will have to fend for himself for a little while. Later that night, Elaine meets up with Barbara in a burlesque bar and tells her everything that's been going on in her life. She also shares her weird experience with Wayne and how she used love magic on him, so Barbara tells her that she should be more careful. A few moments after, their friend, Gah, jumps into the conversation, displeasing Elaine. Later on, Gahan talks about his popular witchcraft classes and how he's invited some girls that night for a seminar about sensual dancing. Suddenly, two blonde girls named Star and Moon approach their table, and Gahan introduces them to Elaine as his students. As they begin a small lecture, Barbara emphasizes that the whole history of witchcraft is interwoven with the fear of female sexuality. That's why they should appear vulnerable to men. Gahan adds that a normative human being is a hyper-rationalistic, stoic male who thinks women's emotions are irrelevant. For this matter, Gahan teaches them that a woman's power lies in their sexuality, and they should use this knowledge to get what they want from any man. After their sermon about sensuality and the power of a woman's body, Elaine goes home later that night. She reminisces her memories of Jerry, who's not the best husband at all. Nevertheless, Elaine loved him despite all his negative comments about her body and her performance as a wife. Later on, she also remembers her baptism as a witch and how the ritual violated and scared her. Meanwhile, in the town's police department, Officer Griff Meadows meets Shelley Curtis, who happens to be a colleague of Wayne that is worried that he got kidnapped. She reports that she saw Wayne drive off with a strange woman 2 weeks ago, and they might have gone up to his cabin in the woods. Consequently, Shelley, Officer Griff, and his partner, Steve, head up to the location and find Wayne's grave and the jar of piss left on top of it. Back in town, Elaine invites Richard over for dinner, and while he drinks the concoction that Elaine gave him, he vents about how his life is slipping from his hand, and he's never even done any love affairs or mischief yet. While Elaine listens to his fantasy, she later manipulates him into thinking that Trish doesn't understand him the way she does. With this in mind, she seduces Richard while dancing and later offers him the mischievous love affair he desperately wants. The night ends with them making love, and Elaine hysterically laughs while proclaiming herself as the love witch. The next day, Officer Griff tells Steve that he's off to meet Professor King, an expert in black magic and witchcraft. He's hoping that the professor can help them identify the items from Wayne's cabin. Before he leaves, he tells Steve about Wayne's toxicology report, showing traces of Jimson weed, also known as Devil's Trumpet, a highly toxic hallucinogenic. Not long after, Officer Griff meets the professor, and he quickly introduces the jar from Wayne's grave. Upon taking a whiff of it, Professor King confirms that it's a witch bottle, which witches use to protect themselves against curses. He later tells Officer Griff about the two kinds of witches, the black witches and the white ones. The black witches practice human sacrifice, performing blood rituals to gain demonic powers and bind their members anonymously. Then, the white witches, or the Wiccans, commune in nature and healing spirits. They also have a tight law that forbids them from causing harm to others. Professor King believes that there are pockets of black and white witches practicing the ancient rites in every city and rural village. As Officer Griff learns more about his potential suspect, Elaine, along with some other witches and Satanists, hosts a ritual in the name of their goddess, Variah. After the ritual, they throw a potluck, where Elaine tells Barbara about her recent split with Richard. She claims that Richard has grown clingy and obsessive, and she should have seen it coming since he's a Pisces. Meanwhile, Richard's marriage is going downhill, and he's done nothing but drink his woes away after Elaine ditches him. The next day, Officer Griff goes to the local witch store to ask about the witch bottle from Wayne's grave. The store owner can't tell who it's from, so she shows the officer a similar product from her shelf, and when he asks who it's from, she tells him of Elaine. Not long after, Officer Griff comes knocking at Elaine's door, wanting to ask her some questions about the homicide case. The look of worry is apparent on Elaine's face, but she plays it cool and even denies knowing Wayne. However, Officer Griff's questions are becoming a little too intense for Elaine, so she turns the situation around, painting the officer as judgmental of witches. Because of this, Officer Griff apologizes for offending her, and as soon as he catches a glimpse of Elaine's soulful eyes, he instantly grows fond of her. Of course, Elaine wastes no time and immediately claims that the officer is the man from her tarot cards, which also means he's fated to be with her. Hearing this, Officer Griff asks her on a date the next day, where they ride horses and giddily kiss like lovers. However, their little moment gets interrupted when they hear music from a distance, coming from a Renaissance fair held by Elaine's coven. Not long after, Barbara and Gahan approach them, but they keep their character as they ask Elaine and the officer to join the festivities. Suddenly, the jester notices the chemistry between Officer Griff and Elaine, so he decides to throw out the idea of a mock wedding, which everyone supports. After listening to a long production number, they get dressed as king and queen and later marry before the coven. As the two of them play along with the festivity, it gets revealed from the officer's point of view that he denies being in love with Elaine, while the latter is deeply and madly in love with him. The next day, Officer Griff shows up for work, and Steve immediately tells him that he has some information about Elaine. However, Griff claims that the captain wants them to lay off the case, much to Steve's protest. Despite Griff's refusal to listen to his findings, Steve tells him anyway and later reveals that Elaine used to run an organic beauty store in Berkeley with her husband, Jerry. 2 years later, they got divorced, and Elaine moved to San Francisco to start dancing in a burlesque club, where she met her coven of witches. After the death of one of its members, the police questioned the coven, causing its disbandment. Shortly after, Jerry died of an overdose before his plans to get remarried. However, the San Francisco police couldn't find anything to keep a hold of Elaine, so they let her go. Despite Steve's concrete revelations, Griff argues that his partner only has a stigma against witches and that the Jimson weed found in Wayne's system grew near his cabin. He also suggests that Wayne often experimented with drugs, so they should lay off Elaine as a suspect. However, after Steve claims that Griff is in love with Elaine, he gets punched in the face, and he calls his partner out for serious misconduct. Meanwhile, Richard becomes consumed with his failed affair and decides to kill himself, leaving Trish to scream in shock upon discovering his corpse. Because of this, Trish meets up with Elaine in the Victorian tea room, where she brings up the affair that she suspects Richard had. Of course, Elaine plays innocent while Trish spills her heart about how she'll rip apart her late husband's mistress. Later on, Elaine insensitively brings up that she's in love and might get married soon. With this in mind, she hands Trish her ring from the mock wedding and soon forgets it as she leaves. Because of this, Trish stops by Elaine's house to return the ring, but for some reason, she stays longer than expected when she finds a lot of interesting things. After Trish observes some of Elaine's belongings, she gets tempted to try on her makeup, wig, and even her lingerie. She enjoys herself for a while, but then she notices the picture frames on Elaine's altar and finds a portrait of her husband, Richard. With shaking hands, she opens the drawers and finds a love spell made especially for Richard and even a voodoo doll. After rummaging through the drawer again, Trish discovers a birthday card her husband made for Elaine's birthday. Suddenly, Elaine enters the room and finds that the truth is out, and so she attempts to stab Trish with a dagger but fails when she gets overpowered by her friend, who is incredibly enraged by her betrayal. The situation quickly escalates as Trish beats up Elaine and blames her for Richard's death. Soon after, she leaves with the evidence she found and threatens Elaine that she'll burn as a consequence of her actions. Scared that she might actually go to jail this time, Elaine desperately holds a sacred necklace and prays to her goddess that Trish will crash and die. Later on, Elaine asks her coven to perform a binding ritual for her and Officer Griff so she can keep him forever. Soon after, she meets up with the officer, and he immediately brings up Wayne's DNA tests and how it connects to her. He also informs her that Trish came by the station to deliver evidence of Elaine's atrocity, which she denies being part of. She tries to turn the situation around again, but Officer Griff stays firm and tells Elaine that she's getting booked for illegally burying Wayne Peters. However, a waitress overhears this statement and screams that Elaine is the witch who killed the teacher from the news, and this drives the whole club mad. The men beat Officer Griff while they pin Elaine to the floor and unclothe her. However, Officer Griff manages to rescue Elaine, and they escape the angry mob. Shortly after, they go to Elaine's house, where she confesses her love for the officer, but all she gets as a response is a cold and empty stare. After Officer Griff tosses the concoction she gave him, Elaine suddenly sees the ghost of her past and realizes that no man will ever love her enough, not even the officer. For this matter, she stabs him through the heart, matching the paintings on the wall from their mock wedding. With Griff dead, Elaine deliriously imagines them at their wedding, where they finally have their happy ending. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.